The sun was shining brightly over Willow Creek Park, one of the most peaceful places in the city. Families were out for picnics, children were running around with balloons, and the soft breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. Among all the happy chatter and laughter, Danielle Carter sat quietly on a wooden bench near the lake, holding a cup of coffee in her hands. Danielle was 32 years old, calm, and confident by nature. She had short, neatly tied back hair and wore a simple grey hoodie with black joggers. To anyone passing by, she looked like an ordinary young woman enjoying a relaxing weekend. But very few people knew who she truly was: an active-duty U.S. Navy SEAL, one of the most elite special operations forces in the world. Her journey to becoming a Navy SEAL had not been easy. It had taken years of endless training, discipline, and determination. She had faced countless physical and mental challenges, but she had never given up. And today, instead of being on a mission, she had decided to take a rare day off to enjoy some quiet time alone. She took a deep breath and smiled as she watched ducks glide across the lake. The sunlight sparkled on the water, making it look like thousands of tiny diamonds were floating on the surface. A group of kids nearby were feeding the ducks and giggling each time one came closer to them. Danielle couldn't help but chuckle softly at their excitement. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from her younger brother, Michael. "Hey sis, hope you're not at work today. Please take a break once in a while." Danielle smiled and replied, "Don't worry, Mike. Just relaxing at the park, fresh air and coffee, perfect combo." The sun had shifted slightly, casting longer shadows across Willow Creek Park. The breeze had passed since the day at Willow Creek Park, and life was slowly returning to normal for Danielle Carter. The video that had once flooded social media was no longer trending, the constant phone calls had slowed down, and the attention from reporters had finally started to fade. But while the noise around her was quieting down, the impact of that day was still unfolding in meaningful ways. What had started as a simple misunderstanding had opened up conversations that Danielle never expected to be a part of. Danielle now found herself balancing two roles: her life as a Navy SEAL and her new position as a bridge between the community and law enforcement. She hadn't asked for this role, but she accepted it with quiet determination. One sunny afternoon, Danielle walked into the local community training center, where she and Sergeant Megan Alvarez had been working on a new program designed to improve communication between officers and the public. Inside the conference room, a group of police officers sat at long tables, notebooks open in front of them. Danielle placed her folder on the podium and smiled warmly. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice steady yet inviting. "Thank you for being here today." The officers turned their attention to her, some curious, some thoughtful. Megan stood off to the side, offering Danielle an encouraging nod. "This workshop," Danielle continued, "isn't about pointing fingers or placing blame. It's about understanding one another better. Sometimes, what we see on the surface isn't the whole story. And sometimes, a calm conversation can prevent unnecessary tension." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I've spent years in high-pressure situations," she said softly, "and one thing I've learned is that composure saves lives. It helps us make better decisions and helps others feel safe. That applies just as much here, in our community, as it does anywhere else." Several officers nodded, their expressions thoughtful. Danielle then introduced short exercises focused on active listening and empathy-building techniques inspired by her Navy training but adapted for everyday interactions. After the session, one officer approached her. "I just wanted to say," he began hesitantly, "I watched the video from the park. I realized how quickly I can make assumptions without even meaning to. Today's session really opened my eyes." Danielle smiled kindly. "That's exactly why we're here," she replied. "We're all still learning. Every day gives us a chance to do better." Megan joined them, placing a supportive hand on the officer's shoulder. "It's about progress," she added. "Not perfection." Word of the workshops spread quickly. Soon, Other departments reached out, requesting Danielle's help in creating similar programs. She hesitated at first. After all, her primary duty was still with the Navy, but her commanding officer, Commander Harris, encouraged her. "You're making a difference here," he told her one morning during a phone call. "Sometimes leadership isn't about rank or orders. It's about influence. And you have the ability to change how people see one another." Danielle felt humbled by his words. She had never sought recognition, but if her experience could help even one person think differently, then the effort was worth it. Outside of work, Danielle returned often to Willow Creek Park. The lake, the trees, and the laughter of children still brought her the same peace they always had. But now, the park carried new meaning. It was no longer just a place for quiet afternoons, it had become the starting point of something bigger, something that connected people who had once stood on opposite sides of an uncomfortable situation. One weekend, Danielle visited the park again, this time with Michael. Her younger brother had insisted on taking her out for coffee and a long walk to relax. "You know," Michael said as they strolled along the pathway, "you've become kind of a local hero." Danielle laughed softly. "I'm not a hero, Mike," she said gently. "I just stayed calm. That's all." "Yeah, but you showed people what patience looks like," he insisted. "You turned what could have been a huge problem into something positive. That's rare." Danielle glanced at him, smiling faintly. "Maybe. But I think Megan deserves just as much credit," she said thoughtfully. "She stepped in at the right moment. It could have gone very differently without her." Michael nodded. "She seems like a good person," he said. "She is," Danielle agreed. "She cares about doing what's right, and that makes all the difference." As they walked, they passed by a group of children playing tag, their laughter filling the air. Parents sat on blankets under the shade of tall oak trees, chatting quietly as the breeze rustled through the leaves. Danielle took a deep breath, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for these simple, peaceful moments. A few minutes later, Megan appeared, walking toward them with a friendly wave. "Hey, Danielle," she called out. "Hey, Megan," Danielle greeted warmly. "Enjoying the weekend?" "Trying to," Megan replied with a smile. "I just came from the department. We've had more officers signing up for your workshops. Seems like word is spreading fast." Danielle's brows lifted slightly in surprise. "That's good news," she said, genuinely pleased. Megan nodded. "It is. People are starting to understand the importance of slowing down, listening, and approaching situations differently. And honestly, you've been the reason for that change." Danielle glanced at the lake, watching the sunlight sparkle on the rippling water. "I think it's more than just me," she said thoughtfully. "I think the community wanted change. This was just the moment that brought everyone together." Megan smiled, understanding exactly what she meant. Weeks later, Danielle was invited to speak at a larger regional conference on public safety and community trust. At first, the idea of addressing hundreds of people felt intimidating, but she reminded herself that she wasn't there to impress anyone, she was there to share her story. Standing at the podium under the bright lights, Danielle looked out at the audience of officers, local leaders, and residents. Taking a deep breath, she began, "A few months ago, I went to Willow Creek Park expecting a quiet afternoon. Instead, I had an unexpected encounter that's now brought us all here today. I've learned something important since then. Moments of tension can become moments of change if we choose patience, respect, and understanding." Her words carried across the room, and silence followed as the audience absorbed her message. "Sometimes," she continued, "it only takes one calm response to shift an entire situation. That's something we can all practice whether we wear a uniform or not." The room erupted in applause when she finished. Megan, standing backstage, clapped the loudest. Even Rick Dawson, who had chosen to attend the event quietly, nodded in quiet agreement. After the conference, several officers and community members approached Danielle, expressing their gratitude. They spoke about how her story had inspired them to be more patient, more open-minded, and more empathetic in their daily interactions. That evening, Danielle returned home and sat on her balcony, overlooking the city lights. She sipped a cup of tea, reflecting on how much had changed since that simple day at the park. She thought about the unexpected journey from sitting quietly by the lake to helping reshape how people communicated and understood one another. She realized that sometimes life placed you in situations you didn't ask for, not to test you, but to prepare you to make a difference. Her phone buzzed with a message from Megan. "Thank you for today. Change takes time, but I believe we've started something important." Danielle smiled softly as she typed back, "We have. And we'll keep going." The city was quiet that night, the stars faint but visible above the skyline. Danielle leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. She knew there would always be challenges ahead, both in her work with the Navy and in the community. But now, she also knew that patience, respect, and understanding could turn even the most unexpected situations into opportunities for growth. The next weekend, she returned once again to Willow Creek Park. The lake was calm, the breeze was cool, and children played in the distance, just as they always had. Sitting on her favorite bench, Danielle smiled quietly to herself, knowing that this place and that single afternoon had changed her life in ways she would never forget. It was no longer just about one misunderstanding. It was about what came after the conversations, the trust, and the slow but steady building of stronger connections between people who once stood apart. Danielle took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly at peace. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and gold, she realized something profound. Sometimes, the quietest moments can lead to the biggest changes. Cooled, and Danielle leaned back against the bench, feeling completely relaxed. She had no idea that her peaceful afternoon was about to change. Danielle sat quietly on the bench, gazing at the lake as the late afternoon the sun was slowly setting, and the golden light reflected off the surface of the lake as Danielle remained seated on the bench. The park had started to quiet down, but the earlier incident still lingered in her thoughts. She wasn't upset or angry, she was simply reflective. Years of Navy SEAL training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but this situation had reminded her of something deeper: how easily misunderstandings could spiral into something larger. She didn't know it yet, but the story of what happened that afternoon was already beginning to spread. Across the park, one of the teenagers who had been playing frisbee earlier had recorded part of the interaction on his phone. At first, he hadn't planned to share it, but as he watched people talk about what had happened, he decided to post the short clip online. Within an hour, the video began circulating on social media. The short clip showed Rick questioning Danielle, Megan stepping in, and the moment Megan revealed Danielle's identity as a Navy SEAL. Viewers were quick to react. Comments started pouring in. "Wow, she stayed so calm the whole time. That's impressive composure. Can't believe she's a Navy SEAL, incredible." By the next morning, the video had gained thousands of views. News outlets began picking up the story, and headlines appeared online. "Police question Navy SEAL in public park, calm response gains attention." Danielle woke up to several missed calls and messages. Her brother, Michael, had sent her a text late at night. "Danielle, you're trending online. Call me ASAP." She sat up, rubbed her eyes, and checked her phone. Notifications filled her screen: messages from teammates, friends, and even people she hadn't spoken to in years. Shaking her head slightly, she called Michael back. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm as usual. "Good morning," Michael exclaimed on the other end. "You're all over the internet. There's a video of you at the park yesterday, and everyone's talking about it." Danielle sighed softly but kept her tone steady. "I figured someone might have recorded it," she admitted. "But honestly, Mike, I didn't expect this kind of attention." Michael chuckled nervously. Well, now everyone knows you're a Navy SEAL. It's in the headlines. Danielle paused for a moment. She had always kept her personal life private, avoiding unnecessary attention. Being in the spotlight wasn't something she enjoyed, but she also knew she hadn't done anything wrong. Don't worry, she said finally. I'll handle it. Later that morning, Danielle received a call from her commanding officer, Commander Harris, who spoke in his usual composed tone. Danielle, he said, I saw the news. I just want you to know we're here to support you. From what I've seen, you handled yourself perfectly. Thank you, sir, she replied. I didn't want it to escalate, so I stayed calm. That's exactly what you should have done, Harris said firmly. You represented the Navy well. Danielle appreciated his reassurance, but she knew this was only the beginning. The attention on her would likely bring more questions from reporters, the public, and even within the police department itself. By afternoon, the local police department released an official statement acknowledging the incident. We are aware of the situation at Willow Creek Park involving Officer Rick Dawson and Navy SEAL Danielle Carter. We are reviewing the matter internally and are committed to ensuring fair and respectful interactions between law enforcement and the public. The statement quickly made its way onto the evening news. Reporters began visiting the park, interviewing people who had witnessed the event. Some described Danielle's calm demeanor, while others praised Megan's timely intervention. Meanwhile, Rick found himself facing an internal review. He hadn't expected the situation to draw this much attention, and while he hadn't broken any laws, his actions were being carefully evaluated. Within the department, some of his colleagues quietly advised him to take the opportunity to reflect and learn from the experience. For Danielle, the sudden spotlight felt unusual. That evening, as she walked into a small grocery store near her apartment, a woman recognized her from the video. Excuse me, the woman said kindly, I just wanted to say, you handled yourself so well yesterday. It was inspiring to see someone stay so composed. Danielle smiled politely. Thank you, she replied softly. I appreciate that. Encounters like this became more common over the next few days. People approached her in cafes, parks, and even at the gym, offering words of encouragement. While she was grateful for the kindness, she hoped the attention would eventually settle down. A few days later, Danielle received a call from Sergeant Megan Alvarez. Danielle, Megan said warmly, I wanted to check on you. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Danielle answered honestly. It's been busy, but I'm okay. Megan sighed softly. I figured it might be overwhelming. The department's review is still ongoing, but I wanted you to know that I've shared my full statement about what happened. I made sure they understood how calmly you handled the situation. Danielle smiled faintly, even though Megan couldn't see it. Thank you, Megan. I really appreciate your support. You deserve it, Megan replied sincerely. You showed remarkable patience. Not everyone could have done that. The call reassured Danielle, but she also knew the story had grown beyond just the two of them. Community leaders were now discussing broader issues: how public spaces were monitored, how officers engaged with citizens, and the importance of avoiding unnecessary confrontations. Soon, Danielle was invited to speak at a small community forum organized by the Willow Creek Neighborhood Association. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking wasn't her favorite thing, but after some thought, she agreed. On the evening of the event, the community center was filled with residents, local officials, and even a few reporters. Megan was there too, standing off to the side. Danielle stepped up to the podium, her presence calm and steady. Good evening, she began, her voice carrying naturally across the room. I didn't expect to be standing here today. Last week, I came to the park simply to enjoy the day. I didn't plan for what happened next, and I certainly didn't expect it to become public. She paused briefly, scanning the room. But I believe something positive can come from this, she continued. Sometimes, situations arise because of misunderstandings, assumptions, or lack of communication. What matters most is how we choose to respond. Her words resonated with the audience, who listened attentively. I've spent years in the Navy, she went on, and one thing my training has taught me is the value of composure. In moments of tension, staying calm can prevent small situations from becoming bigger than they need to be. That's what I tried to do at the park, not just for myself, but for everyone around me. When she finished, the room filled with applause. Megan approached her afterward, smiling proudly. You did great, Megan said. Thanks, Danielle replied, relieved it was over. After the event, several community leaders approached Danielle with an idea, to collaborate with the police department on new training programs focused on communication, empathy, and public engagement. Danielle agreed to participate, seeing it as an opportunity to make a difference. As days turned into weeks, Danielle began working closely with Megan and other officers, sharing insights from her SEAL training. Together, they developed workshops designed to strengthen relationships between law enforcement and the community. Meanwhile, the internal review of Rick Dawson concluded. The department announced that Rick would attend mandatory training sessions focused on awareness, communication, and respectful engagement with the public. He also requested a personal meeting with Danielle to apologize. When they met at the station, Rick spoke quietly but sincerely. I misjudged the situation, he said. I want to apologize for the way I handled it. Danielle nodded, offering a small smile. I appreciate that, she replied. I believe everyone learns from experiences like this. What matters is what we do moving forward. Rick nodded slowly, clearly grateful for her understanding. By the end of the month, the story that had once caused a stir began to settle, replaced by a more meaningful outcome. Instead of division, the incident sparked conversations, training, and stronger connections between the community and the police. Danielle had never wanted attention, but she realized that sometimes life put people in unexpected situations so that change could happen. Still, as she walked through Willow Creek Park one evening, coffee cup in hand, she smiled quietly to herself. The lake shimmered, the breeze was soft, and families filled the park again just as they had before. For Danielle, this wasn't just about one afternoon. It was about turning tension into understanding and showing that calmness, patience, and respect could make all the difference. But little did she know, the impact of that single day was still unfolding and her role in shaping what came next had only just begun. Sunlight softened. Her earbuds still played calm instrumental music, but her mind wasn't as peaceful as before. The brief encounter with Officer Rick Dawson had left her thoughtful. Years of Navy SEAL training had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, those instincts whispered that something about the situation wasn't finished. She had dealt with unpredictable scenarios before, both on missions and in daily life, and she knew the value of staying alert even when things seemed calm. A few minutes later, she noticed movement from the corner of her eye. Officer Dawson had returned, walking slowly in her direction, his expression unreadable. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Another officer, a woman with a confident posture and short dark hair, walked beside him. Her uniform bore the name tag Sergeant Megan Alvarez. Danielle watched as the two officers approached, keeping her expression neutral. She removed her earbuds and set her phone aside. Ma'am, Rick began, his voice steady but firmer than before. I need you to come with us for a few questions. Danielle looked up calmly. Is there a reason for that, officer? She asked politely, her tone soft but direct. Rick glanced at Megan briefly, as though expecting her support. We've received a few reports about unusual activity in the area, he said vaguely. Just need to confirm some information. Danielle's heart remained steady, but her training kept her aware of every detail: the officers' body language, their tone, and the growing attention from nearby park visitors. A small group of people had already begun watching the situation unfold. Before Danielle could respond, Megan stepped slightly forward, placing herself between Rick and Danielle. Her voice was calm but carried authority. "Rick, let me handle this," Megan said quietly. Rick frowned but didn't object. Megan turned to Danielle, her expression softening instantly. "Danielle Carter," she asked gently, as though confirming something she already suspected. Danielle raised an eyebrow slightly. "Yes," she replied, her voice calm but curious. A knowing smile spread across Megan's face. "I thought so," she said warmly. "We met a few months ago during the Navy Police Joint Training Session at Norfolk Base, didn't we?" Recognition dawned on Danielle's face, and she gave a slight nod. "Yes," she said with a small smile. "That's right. You were part of the tactical support team." Rick's eyes widened slightly, looking between the two women. "Wait, you two know each other?" he asked, confusion lacing his voice. Megan nodded. "Yes. Danielle isn't just anyone," she explained calmly. "She's one of the Navy's most highly trained special operations officers. In fact," she paused deliberately, "she's a Navy SEAL." A ripple of surprise ran through the small crowd nearby. The teenagers who had been playing frisbee stopped mid-game, and a couple of joggers slowed down to listen. Even Rick's usually confident demeanor faltered for a moment. Danielle, however, stayed composed. She had never liked drawing attention to her position or her accomplishments, and right now, she wished the topic hadn't come up at all. "I'm just here to enjoy my day off," she said softly, trying to redirect the conversation. Megan smiled reassuringly and nodded. "Of course," she said gently. "I just thought it was important to clarify things." Rick, still processing the revelation, shifted uncomfortably. "A Navy SEAL," he repeated quietly, as if saying the words would help him understand. "Yes," Megan confirmed with calm authority. "She's one of the very few women to complete the SEAL program. She's trained at the highest level of discipline and defense." Danielle gave a polite but modest shrug. "I'm just doing my job, like everyone else," she said softly, her humility apparent. Rick looked down for a brief moment, clearly rethinking his earlier assumptions. "I didn't realize," he admitted quietly. Danielle gave a small, understanding nod. "I know," she replied. "And that's okay. We all make assumptions sometimes." The tension in the air began to ease, but the crowd's curiosity kept growing. A few bystanders whispered among themselves, and someone even pulled out a phone, discreetly recording. Danielle noticed but chose to ignore it, focusing instead on maintaining calmness. Megan, sensing the shift in energy, turned to Rick and spoke firmly. "I think we're done here, Rick. There's no need for further questioning." Rick nodded hesitantly, his posture less rigid than before. "Right," he said quietly. Megan then addressed Danielle directly. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding," she said sincerely. "I know you probably wanted a quiet day." Danielle offered her a warm smile. "It's all right," she replied. "I understand you're just doing your job." Megan nodded gratefully. "Thank you for being patient," she said before stepping aside to give Danielle space. The crowd slowly began dispersing as the situation settled, but Danielle could still feel a few lingering glances from people who had overheard the conversation. Some looked surprised, others looked impressed. Danielle, however, didn't seek any admiration. She picked up her coffee cup, now nearly empty, and took a small sip before placing it back on the bench. Her thoughts drifted to her SEAL training again, the endless drills, the challenges, the pressure to stay composed no matter the circumstances. Today had reminded her of something important. Staying calm wasn't just about controlling herself but also about helping others feel at ease. Megan walked back toward Rick, speaking softly but firmly. Danielle couldn't hear the exact words, but she noticed Rick nodding repeatedly, his expression thoughtful. After a brief exchange, Megan returned to Danielle's bench. If you need anything or feel uncomfortable, Megan said kindly, you can always reach out to me. She handed Danielle a small business card with her name and direct number. Danielle accepted it with a polite nod. Thank you, she said. I appreciate that. Megan smiled warmly and turned to leave, signaling Rick to follow her. The two officers walked away together, their conversation quiet and brief. Danielle exhaled slowly, allowing herself to relax fully for the first time since the encounter began. She leaned back against the bench and stared at the rippling water, letting the gentle sound of the lake calm her thoughts. For a while, she sat in silence, listening to the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze and the distant laughter of children. The moment of tension had passed, but the experience had left her reflecting on how quickly assumptions could shape interactions between people. Her phone buzzed suddenly, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Michael. Hey, sis. Still at the park? Hope you're having a relaxing day. Danielle smiled faintly and typed back, I'm here. It's been eventful, but I'm okay. She put her phone down and closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The air smelled faintly of grass and flowers, and the warmth of the sun on her face reminded her to focus on the present. Even as she settled back into the peacefulness of the park, Danielle couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of the situation. Her instincts told her there was more to come, something she couldn't yet see but needed to be ready for. Somewhere nearby, Megan and Rick stood near the park's entrance, talking quietly. Rick's expression had softened, but his posture suggested he was still processing everything. Danielle didn't hold any resentment toward him. Instead, she hoped the experience would lead to better understanding, both for him and for others who had watched the events unfold. The lake shimmered in the fading sunlight, and Danielle sat quietly, enjoying the calm after the unexpected interruption. She knew that staying composed wasn't just about her training, it was about choosing patience, kindness, and control, even when situations became complicated. What she didn't realize was that this encounter had already set something larger in motion. The phones that had recorded snippets of the conversation would soon make their way onto social media, and before long, her quiet afternoon at the park would become part of a much bigger story. For now, though, Danielle stayed focused on the sound of the water and the beauty of the moment, unaware of just how much her life and the lives of others were about to change. Not far away, Officer Rick Dawson walked along the park's main pathway. At 38 years old, Rick was known among his colleagues for being strict about rules. He believed that keeping public spaces safe meant questioning anyone who looked suspicious, and unfortunately, his assumptions were often influenced by appearances rather than actions. Rick's eyes moved across the park as he scanned the crowd. Most people were walking their dogs, enjoying picnics, or jogging. Then his gaze landed on Danielle, who was sitting quietly on the bench with her phone beside her. To Rick, she stood out, though he couldn't explain why. Maybe it was her calm, confident posture, or maybe it was simply his own misjudgment. He began walking toward her, adjusting his uniform as he approached. Danielle noticed him out of the corner of her eye but didn't think much of it. After all, it wasn't unusual for police officers to patrol the park. She continued scrolling through her phone, answering a few messages from her brother and teammates. Rick stopped a few feet away from her bench and spoke in a firm tone. "Excuse me, ma'am. Can I see some identification, please?" Danielle looked up, slightly surprised. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked calmly, keeping her voice polite. "I just need to know who you are and what you're doing here," Rick replied, folding his arms. Danielle blinked, unsure why she was being questioned. She glanced around at the families and joggers nearby, none of whom seemed to be under the same scrutiny. She took a deep breath before responding, keeping her tone respectful. "I'm just relaxing at the park," she said. "Enjoying my day off." Rick frowned slightly, studying her expression. "That's fine," he said slowly, "but I still need to see some identification." Danielle hesitated for a moment. Something about his tone felt unnecessarily sharp, but she decided to stay composed. She reached into her small crossbody bag and handed him her ID card. Rick glanced at it, then at her, and then back at the ID again. "Danielle Carter," he read aloud. "All right, and what do you do for a living?" Danielle smiled faintly, knowing that this question often led to long conversations. "I work with the Navy," she answered simply. Rick raised an eyebrow. "The Navy, hey?" "Yes," she replied with a nod, deciding to keep her exact role private. For a moment, Rick seemed satisfied, but then his tone shifted slightly. "Do you live around here?" he asked. "Yes, a few blocks away," Danielle said patiently. "I come here often." There was silence between them for a moment. Danielle assumed the conversation was over and reached for her coffee cup, but Rick continued standing there. Something in his expression suggested he wasn't ready to leave. "Look," Danielle said gently, "I understand you're just doing your job, but I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just sitting here." Rick crossed his arms tighter. "We've had reports about suspicious activity in the area," he said vaguely. "I'm just making sure everything's in order." Danielle looked around. Families were playing, joggers were passing by, and children were chasing bubbles in the air. Nothing about the park seemed unusual. She didn't argue, though instead, she nodded calmly and replied, "I understand, officer. But as you can see, I'm just sitting here quietly." By now, a few people nearby had started noticing the interaction. A couple walking their dog slowed down to watch, and a group of teenagers playing frisbee exchanged glances. Danielle became aware of the small audience forming but stayed composed, determined not to escalate the situation. Rick seemed unsettled by her calmness, as though expecting her to respond differently. His tone grew slightly firmer. "I'm going to need you to stand up for me," he said. Danielle looked up at him, her expression still polite but now slightly confused. "Is there a reason, officer?" "I need to make sure everything's fine," he said, gesturing toward the path. Danielle considered her options carefully. Years of Navy SEAL training had taught her to stay composed under pressure, but also to recognize when a situation required calm reasoning rather than confrontation. She stood up slowly, her movements measured and respectful. "Of course," she said softly, adjusting her hoodie as she rose from the bench. Rick studied her again, almost as if searching for something wrong, but found nothing. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Danielle's steady, confident gaze caught him off guard. "Is there anything else you need from me?" she asked politely, her voice even. Rick hesitated, then finally shook his head. "Not for now," he muttered, handing her ID back. Danielle took it and placed it carefully into her bag. "Thank you, officer," she said, giving him a slight nod before sitting back down. She expected him to walk away, but Rick lingered nearby, watching her for another moment. The tension in the air was noticeable now, and a few onlookers whispered softly among themselves. Danielle kept her focus on the lake, choosing not to react. A jogger passing by called out casually, trying to ease the awkwardness. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Danielle smiled and nodded. "It is," she replied warmly. After a long pause, Rick finally stepped back. "All right," he said quietly. "Stay safe." With that, he turned and walked toward another area of the park, speaking briefly to another officer stationed near the entrance. Danielle watched him leave, letting out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She reminded herself of something she had learned during training: control is strength. It wasn't about reacting quickly, it was about responding thoughtfully, even when things felt tense. The small crowd that had been watching began to disperse, going back to their picnics, games, and conversations. Danielle sipped the last of her coffee, letting the warmth calm her nerves. She reminded herself that sometimes misunderstandings happened, and the best response was patience. A young woman who had been sitting nearby with her book approached Danielle hesitantly. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Danielle smiled reassuringly. "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you for asking." The woman nodded and returned to her spot under a tree, looking relieved. Danielle decided to stay at the park a little longer, determined not to let the encounter ruin her day. She put in her earbuds and played some soft music, letting the calm melodies wash over her. Her breathing steadied as she focused again on the gentle ripples in the lake and the sunlight glimmering on the water. But deep down, Danielle knew this wasn't over. Something about the officer's persistence stayed in her mind. She didn't like to assume the worst, but her instincts finely tuned from years of special operations training told her she needed to stay aware. She glanced around the park once more, taking in every detail without appearing obvious. 2 joggers ran by, a family was setting up a picnic, and the same group of teenagers continued their frisbee game. Everything looked normal, yet Danielle couldn't shake the feeling that the situation had unsettled her in ways she couldn't fully explain. For now, she chose patience over reaction. It was a lesson she had carried throughout her career: sometimes the strongest action is quiet restraint. As the breeze carried the sound of children's laughter across the park, Danielle sat still, her calm demeanor hiding the quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. What she didn't know was that the brief encounter she just had was only the beginning. The next time paths crossed, things would unfold in a way no one in the park could have predicted. For the first time in weeks, she felt at peace. No loud drills. No strict schedules. No missions to plan. Just her, the warm sunlight, and the sound of nature. She leaned back on the bench, closing her eyes for a moment. It was rare for her to have time like this, where she could simply enjoy being herself rather than constantly thinking about strategies or survival techniques. Danielle valued discipline, but she also knew the importance of balance. And this park with its calm lake, tall trees, and gentle breeze gave her exactly that. Nearby, an elderly couple walked past her, holding hands and sharing quiet laughter. A jogger ran by, nodding politely as he passed. 2 women sat on a picnic blanket reading books. Everything around her seemed so normal, so peaceful, and Danielle silently wished every day could be like this. She sipped her coffee and scrolled through her phone, checking the news and some messages from her fellow SEAL teammates. One of them had sent her a photo from their last training session, everyone covered in mud, laughing after a particularly tough exercise. Danielle smiled, remembering how her team had pushed each other through every obstacle. They were like family to her, bound by trust and respect. Just as she was about to put her phone away, she noticed a group of teenagers playing frisbee nearby. One of them accidentally threw the disc too far, and it landed close to her bench. Danielle picked it up and handed it back with a warm smile. "Thanks," one of the boys said, slightly out of breath. "No problem," Danielle replied. "Enjoy your game." Her voice was soft, friendly, and calm. She then took another sip of her coffee and let her eyes wander across the park. For a brief moment, she thought about her life before the Navy, growing up in a small neighborhood, her mother's endless encouragement, and her father's words of wisdom. Her parents had always taught her to stay strong, stay kind, and stand up for what was right. Those lessons had shaped her into the person she was today. She remembered the day she decided to join the Navy. Everyone around her had doubts. Some said the training would be too difficult. Others believed it wasn't meant for women. But Danielle had believed in herself. She had trained harder than ever before, running miles before sunrise, swimming in freezing waters, and pushing her body beyond its limits. She never forgot the moment she finally earned her place among the Navy SEALs. It had been the proudest day of her life. And yet, sitting here in the park, she felt no need to show off her achievements. She preferred staying low-key, enjoying the small, simple things. To her, strength wasn't about loudness or showing power, it was about patience, control, and understanding. The sounds of birds chirping overhead blended with the laughter of children in the distance. A soft gust of wind brushed against her face, making her pull her hoodie a little tighter. She finished the last sip of her coffee and placed the cup beside her on the bench. A little girl passed by holding a balloon, and the string slipped from her hand. The balloon floated upward into the sky, and the girl gasped in disappointment. Danielle quickly crouched down beside her and smiled. "Don't worry," she said gently. "Sometimes balloons like to visit the clouds." The little girl blinked, then smiled back. "Really?" "Really," Danielle replied, giving her a small wink. The girl giggled and ran back to her parents, who waved a quick thank you to Danielle. She nodded back politely, feeling a quiet happiness in helping even in small ways. For a while, Danielle simply sat there, watching life move around her. The park had its own rhythm, like a song everyone unknowingly played together, joggers keeping pace, kids laughing, dogs barking, and leaves rustling. It was a beautiful reminder that even in a busy world, there were still moments where time slowed down, letting people breathe and feel alive. She glanced at her watch. It was almost 3 p.m., but she wasn't in a hurry to leave. The thought of going back to her apartment felt less appealing compared to the peaceful energy around her. She decided to stay a little longer, stretching her legs out in front of her and leaning against the bench comfortably. At that moment, Danielle noticed a tall police officer walking through the park, speaking to a few people. She didn't pay much attention, assuming he was just doing his regular patrol. Her mind drifted back to memories of her last mission overseas, the faces of her teammates, and the challenges they had faced together. Little did she know, the calm afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test her patience, her strength, and her belief in staying composed under pressure. For now, though, she kept her focus on the lake, unaware that her peaceful day was slowly moving toward an encounter that would change everything.